called. So he's doing the boxing on March the 2nd, and then I don't know, probably a week later we'll see the
Well, good morning. Welcome, Powerful Moments Sunday School class. So we're glad you're here today. So,
We're glad you're here.
well, thank you. We were at Rachel and James's house last week. We appreciate Stan teaching for me last week, so thank you, Stan. And they're here this weekend, so we're just trading off. So we've enjoyed that. So, a couple of things, just FYI, you may not realize this, but at Asbury, if you recall, in 1970, there was a Asbury revival that lasted for, I don't know how long it lasted, to be honest, but it touched thousands and thousands of lives. It was, I guess, as far as I know, maybe the last major revival that just spread over the country. Well, there's a new Asbury revival that started. It started on February the 2nd, I think. Is that right? February the 2nd. And it said now we've got social media. We didn't have that in 1970, but it says there's been, I'm not sure what the right word social media is. Let's say contacts, 26 million contacts through social media related to the Asbury revival. And it continues on, and it's a lot of days a standing room only or sellout crowd. They don't have enough room in the facility for everybody to get in. Some of the students have been sleeping in the chapel where they're holding this. Now they're moving it to somewhere else. So it's just for those that are students or 25. Use your microphone.
It's for people that are 25 years old and younger, and it's been going on 24 hours a day since February the 2nd.
Yeah.
They met in a chapel just for their regular chapel, and they never,
Haven't left.
They haven't left.
Since. Mm-hmm. Now, that 18 to 25 is just special times during the day. They're reserving it for 18 to 25. Other times of the day, all the public is invited. So if you want to drive up, Asbury's, I don't know, looks to be 30 miles or so south of Lexington, Kentucky. So if you want to drive up and participate, check out before you go on the online when it's open to the public, so that you can get in. So just thought that was exciting news. The other thing Ronnie Woodall shared with me yesterday, some of you may remember Becky Lehman, who was in our class for quite a while, left. Her husband died sometime last week. I'm not sure Ronnie told me. He said the memorial service was Thursday. I didn't know anything about it, but so for you again who know Becky, her husband did pass away. I think he'd been ill even when she was here in class and so forth. So I'm not sure the exact illness. So. Okay. I know Melinda has some good news, and if you'll share the details in the prayer book, but David has met with oncologists, she told me, and has got a biopsy planned, and then they'll follow up with oncologists. So it sounds like that's also progressing on a good path at this point. So, okay, what else have I forgotten? Who? Oh, B. Yeah, B's up in Kentucky with her son and daughter-in-law.
No, her
Brother, I'm sorry. I can't keep getting her family mixed up. I'm sorry. Up in Kentucky with her brother, so excuse me. So she's staying up there, but plans to return, right, at some point as her, yeah, we'll see. So keep her in your prayers too as she recovers. Okay. I'm sorry?
Did you give an update on Buddy yet?
No, So my brother Buddy is scheduled for open heart surgery Tuesday. He had a stent last week, so I think maybe, from what he thinks anyway, 4 bypasses. Doesn't matter if it's 1 or 4 or 10, but so once they got you cracked open. So this is his second time through it, but he's doing well when we talked to him. So that's surgery. He goes in at 9 to the hospital at 9 on Tuesday. Yeah, Mark, you had...
I was just going to say pray for Danny Dillon's family. He passed away. He was a cabinet maker here, built cabinets for Cracker Barrel, and he was only 62.
Is he Richard Dillon's?
Miles Dillon's dad, Richard Dillon's brother. Yeah, so he had a knee replacement and some complications, and then one thing after another. And his wife passed away about 8 months ago, and just kind of downhill from there. He never recovered really, so he passed away a couple days ago.
That's Richard's brother.
Richard's brother.
Danny Dillon.
Danny Dillon.
Yeah, there used to be Dillon Cabinets, and I don't know, do they still run that business?
Yep, still was running it, and was on the south side of town, and so.
Yeah, Danny Dillon passed away, so remember his family. Okay, anything else? Please include these things in the prayer book and others that we didn't mention verbally. So with that, anybody like to pray for us to get started this morning? Yeah, Mark, thank you.
Yeah, Father, Lord, thank you for this opportunity to come together and lift up your praises and prayer requests. Lord, just thank you for the fellowship and the friendship with fellow believers here today. Lord, guide and direct us in all we do, and thank you, Brother Tom, and his diligence to teach us each week. Lord, we just praise you for what's going on in this church, and especially the church up in Kentucky with the revivals. May that spread amongst all the other churches around the world. In Jesus' name I pray.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we're looking at, I think maybe I'm a week behind the pastor. I'm not sure. Yeah, Cindy says I am. So we're in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43, and I've entitled this lesson, Do Not Be Afraid, Only Believe. That's the quote from Jesus we'll see in the lesson today. Do not be afraid, only believe. So this lesson continues our study of Jesus' ministry in eastern Galilee. So this follows some of Jesus' teaching and parables when he gave the parable of the sower, the parable of the soils, the parable of the mustard seed. So in our last 2 lessons, we've seen Jesus' authority over natural danger, that being when they were crossing the Sea of Galilee, I won't say the Red Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and as a raging storm, Jesus told the storm to hush, be quiet, and they passed over the sea without drowning. And then the next lesson covered Jesus' authority of the supernatural when Jesus confronted a horde of demons, which he called legion, and he sent the legion of demons into pigs. They ran off and drowned in the lake. So in today's lesson, we're going to see Jesus' authority over disease and over death. So with that, Martha, if you would read Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. This section is entitled The Approach. The Approach.
When Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him.
All right, so this follows Jesus returning from the region of the Gerasenes. Now he's crossed back over to Capernaum on the other side of the lake. It's about a 6-mile journey, roughly, we think, across the lake. And as he gets to the other side of the lake, We'll see in the verses today that two specific people approach him in these verses today. But also, I suspect, we don't know, that many more people will probably receive miracles during this time that Jesus is here after crossing over to Capernaum. We're just not told that in the scripture, so that's supposition on my part. So anyway, do you see something ironic about this large crowd now that's greeting Jesus here around Capernaum upon his return trip from the Gerasenes? See anything ironic about that? Exactly, Jill. On the other side of the lake, when he was in the region of the Gerasenes, the people there, after he ran the horde of demons into the pigs, they are encouraged, is probably not a strong enough word. They forced Jesus really away. So that's when they crossed back to the other side, to Capernaum. And on the Capernaum side, here he's met by a large group of people who are excited about seeing them. So what a different reaction to Jesus between two relatively close areas geographically. As we said, they're separated by about 6 miles on one side of the lake. They were trying to get rid of Jesus. On the other side, they're excited to greet and welcome Jesus. So, is this reaction similar, this reaction to Jesus, maybe similar to what we see today between two geographically closely locations to each other, but where the people maybe are far apart spiritually? Any similarities today? No? None? Well, I thought of maybe a couple. Jill was going to say. Yeah. I said, is there any similarity? Here, these two groups of people are relatively close geographically, maybe 6 miles apart. One ran Jesus off. One group ran Jesus off. The other, on the other side, were welcoming him and glad to see him. Is there any similarity between two groups of people who are geographically close together but have very different spiritual positions? Your neighborhood. All right, good. What about that, Jill?
Well, I have one neighbor. Every year she wants me to give her tomatoes for my garden, and I tell her she has to go to church with me first. I don't really hold her to that. We just pick back and forth at each other. But she knows where we stand, and I try to talk to her, and she always just jokes. Thank goodness, she's not like mean and hateful to me and stuff. But we, pick back and forth, and, she is totally against Jesus and doesn't want anything to do with Jesus. And I got neighbors across the street that don't go to church, don't really care, And I mean, there's a lot in my neighborhood, I feel like, that are like that. But so all we can do is every year I put that Christmas It's All About Jesus sign in my yard and the Easter sign, I just try to let them see us,
Yeah.
Jesus in our family.
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. So I suspect that's true of a lot of neighborhoods where you've got people living next door that are unbelievers to you, where you're a believer, so geographically very close to each other. Any other examples you can think of? The example that came to mind initially for me was that of pro-abortionists and anti-abortionists can be picketing on the same city block, basically. So there you got very different spiritual views, levels of spirituality virtually next to each other. You have, I would take not just neighborhoods, but also in families. You can have very close relatives, maybe they live next door, live close by, that can have a very different level of belief, spirituality than maybe you do. So I don't think this is very unusual, or it is maybe ironic, but not very unusual that we see these two different types of groups, or two different groups of people and how they receive Jesus.
It also reminds me a little bit of the rich man, you know, that denied Christ, and then the poor man went to heaven, and they were separated.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Rich man passed the poor man, you know, sounds like every day and very different.
But I mean, even
Spiritual.
in afterlife, because he could look over and see.
Yeah. Yeah. The results are going to be very different
Yeah,
in
there's something
eternity,
separated
aren't
them.
they?
Yeah.
Good. Good example. Thank you. All right. So in these verses, who do we learn is among the large crowd that greeted Jesus at the shore there, the Sea of Galilee, when he crosses back to Capernaum? Jairus. So who's Jairus? His daughter is sick. That's exactly right. What else do we know about him? He was a synagogue official. How old was his daughter? 12 years old. So he had a 12-year-old daughter. We know he was a synagogue official, and he evidently lived in or around Capernaum. So I suspect or believe Jairus was most likely a Pharisee. So why would I believe Jairus was a Pharisee? Because he did work in the synagogue, so I think is certainly one good reason that he's a synagogue official, which would imply that probably, percentage-wise, there are more Pharisees as synagogue officials. So that's one reason. What else do you think? Anything else?
He probably knew a lot about Jesus and what he'd been doing.
Knew a lot about Jesus and what he'd been doing. How would he know that?
Because the Pharisees were all a Twitter.
The Pharisees were all a Twitter. Yeah. They all were in his business. So I think about Jairus, it may make me think that he was a Pharisee, is that we'll see later in the story that Jairus learns that his daughter had died, but he still had faith in Jesus. So that implies to me that as Pharisees, they believed in an afterlife. The Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife. So again, it kind of makes me think that he was a Pharisee. And as we see, we're going to see a big split, as Martha said, among the Pharisees and their response to Jesus. So in what manner did Jairus approach Jesus? He was pretty humble. What did he do, Stan?
Bible says he fell at his feet.
Yeah, fell from his feet, which could mean that he bowed down or he even laid prostrate at Jesus' feet. And sometimes it means one, sometimes the other. What else did he do? Does it appear that he did? He begged. He begged Jesus to come heal his daughter. So Jairus was this highly respected synagogue official in the community. And he, as Martha said, that many of the Pharisees hated Jesus. We know that. They wanted to kill him. But even aware of all this, regardless of his social standing, regardless of what other Jewish leaders, religious leaders thought, or may have thought of Jesus, Jairus disregarded all of this and humbled himself to come to Jesus, to approach Jesus, to heal his daughter. So Martha said a minute ago that Jairus would probably known about Jesus. Do you remember one significant event that happened that Jairus would probably or could well have been aware of, that would make him think Jesus could heal his daughter? No, Lazarus, that hadn't happened yet. So back in Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28, this is the account of Jesus casting out a demon in a synagogue in Capernaum. So Jairus could have very well been present at that time and seeing Jesus have control, have authority over demons. So again, probably Jairus had seen many people healed as well, so he probably had some firsthand knowledge of Jesus' authority. All right, so how does Jesus respond to Jairus? He follows him to his house. He tells Jairus to do what? Specifically, walk with me, right? Walk with me to your house. And so Jesus walked with believers in the first century, and Jesus continues to walk with believers in the 21st century. So Jairus and Jesus take off walking toward Jairus' house. So with that, we now have an interlude. Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. Martha.
A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. Immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, You see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, Who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction.
All right, thank you, Martha. So as Jesus is walking in the midst of this crowd with Jairus to his house, what happens? It's not a trick question. Yeah. The woman with the issue of blood, the hemorrhaging illness, touches Jesus' garment. So we begin to have this interlude. So evidently, well, we won't go there quite yet. So Jesus stops and asks, Who touched my garment? And in the other Gospels, it appears that, or states that the woman touched the fringe of his garment. The rabbis of that day would have little tassels at the bottom of their garment. So maybe she just touched a little tassel at the bottom of Jesus' garment. So this woman then, Jesus asks who touches her, and she confesses that it was her. So the Jewish Talmud, or rule book, or ceremonial listing of rules and so forth, they give a number of ways that you might be healed from this hemorrhaging issues. There's 11 possible remedies for a woman who has this condition. A couple of those are placing an ostrich egg in a cloth sack. That's one. That didn't work, evidently. Carrying around a barley corn kernel procured from a female donkey's doo-doo. That evidently didn't work. So it's amazing that these remedies did not cure this illness, right? How could that not be? So Matthew's gospel tells us that she only got worse during this time. So this condition of this woman would have caused her to be religiously unclean. She would be treated as a leper by being religiously unclean. She would not be able to attend synagogue services. She would not be able to associate with her family because they would be unclean. She would be basically an outcast within her society. So she could not participate in any of the activities as such of the community because the community could not be close to her. They would have to separate. So how long had this woman, had this hemorrhaging condition? 12 years. So this evidently was a chronic condition. She had a chronic illness. This wasn't a short-term acute illness. This is something that, as Stan said, has gone on for 12 years. How did the woman approach Jesus? in faith. She approached in faith. We find that out. I think I think she must have been disguised or clandestinely approached Jesus. Otherwise, if the people around in this large crowd knew, hey, here's this woman that's got this hemorrhaging issue, we're going to be unclean if we're around her, they wouldn't have hung around. So I think she must have had some kind of disguise as such, or maybe she jumped out from being hidden, or who knows what, to touch the tassel of his garment. So she approached, it seems that she approached Jesus from behind. She had an urgent need, so she was willing to do what it takes to be healed. It appears that, it says in the Gospels, that her resources had been used up, so she couldn't try any more ostrich eggs in the sackcloth or whatever anymore. She had to try something else, and basically I think she thought, I'm at the end of my rope. Why don't I try to touch the tassel of Jesus' garment? So, all right, so the woman thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. And Mark just said that she approached Jesus with faith. What do you think about her level of faith?
Had to be great because, she was diving through all kinds of people and they, if they had known what her situation was, it would have been not good for her.
There's two kind of schools of thought. One is just what Jamie said, that some people think her faith was great because she did whatever it took to approach Jesus to touch his garment. The other school of thought is that her faith was mechanical or mystical, that she thought, well, if I touch his garment magically, mystically, I'll be healed. That it was not a deep faith, but more of a faith that might have been in the community, similar to carrying around an ostrich egg in a sack. If I touch his garment, I'll be healed. So I'm not sure which way I lean. I probably lean more toward great faith than I do the other, but some folks believe in the other side of faith. So with either view, though, I think her faith was genuine. Her faith was genuine, but maybe it was imperfect. When I say her faith was genuine faith leads to action. The woman took action. The woman did whatever it took in her mind to get to Jesus, to touch his garment, believing, having faith that she would be healed. When I say that maybe the faith was imperfect, it was the woman didn't think it was important to ask Jesus to heal her. She just touched his garment. So Jesus, she was also going with Jesus. So maybe she thought, I won't bother Jesus now because Jesus is going with Jairus. I think it said Jesus. Jairus is going with Jesus, so I won't bother him by asking. I'll just touch his garment. The 11 cures of the Talmud had not healed her, so why not try again with Jesus? I'm at the end of my rope. I've tried all these other things, so now I'll try Jesus. So again, maybe an imperfect faith, but a genuine faith in that she did come to Jesus. So is that different from us? How often do we have to get to the end of our rope to try to be healed with an ostrich egg in a sack or whatever? Not seriously, obviously, but how often do we try everything else, try to do it on our own before we approach Jesus and ask him to heal us? So, and again, the other side of this is there were a lot of people there probably that needed healing. Jesus didn't physically heal, or at least we're not told that Jesus physically healed everybody there either. So we don't know why Jesus healed some folks physically and some not. So anyway, I think her approach is similar sometimes to ours. We're at the end of our rope, so we'll go to Jesus now. So, all right. Do people, I guess we just answered this. Do people today have thoughts similar to what the woman with the hemorrhaging condition may have had? Again, I think, from what I think anyway, I think so. But I think what the woman did prove to us is never too late to go to Jesus. She'd had this issue for 12 years, tried everything, spent all the resources she had, but she still went to Jesus and she was healed, so it wasn't too late. It's never too late to go. And
she went on her first opportunity.
She went, to our knowledge, on her first opportunity. Jesus had been in Capernaum before, so we're not sure it's her first opportunity, but it very well could have been her first opportunity. We don't know what was going on with her.
Well, in verse 27, it says, after hearing about Jesus, came up in the crowd behind him.
Yeah,
She
so
had to
maybe
come
it
up
was.
with a plan.
Excuse me?
She had to come up with a plan.
She had to come up with a plan, yeah. So when the woman touches Jesus' garment, what do we say happened? What happens? Not a trick question. She's healed. How quickly was she healed?
Immediately.
It says immediately. So this is typical of Mark's fashion. Everything is action-oriented. Everything is quick and fast. So here it says it immediately happened. In these verses we're looking at today, Mark uses this word immediately 4 times. This is the first of those 4 times in these verses. So in Mark, what did Jesus ask upon realizing the power had left him? Who touched my garments? Mark 5:30 it says. So it says in that verse, it also says immediately Jesus knew power had left from him. So we see the second immediately here Mark mentions. So why did Jesus ask the question of Mark 30, the question about who touched my garments? Do you think Jesus didn't know who touched his garments? He knew, so why did he ask the question? Yeah, so he was drawing her out for confession or profession that she was the one that touched his garments. So how did the disciples respond to Jesus' question about who touched me? Not people here.
Everybody's touching you.
Everybody's touching him. I got to think the disciples thought, Jesus, are you crazy? There's people all around you bumping into you. So what do you mean somebody touched you? Of course they're touching you. So I think the disciples, again, they don't quite yet get it. They don't quite yet understand what's going on. So how does Jesus respond to the disciples? Yeah, he might have been thinking that, but what does he say anything to them?
He ignores it.
He ignores them. He just goes on about his business and he pays no attention, ignores the disciples there. He knows they don't quite get it yet. So how did the woman respond to Jesus' question of who touched him?
It scared her.
She was scared, she was fearful. It says fearful and trembling. What else does she do? Fell at his feet, which again implies worship, similar to who else fell at Jesus' feet when they approached him? Jairus fell at Jesus' feet as well. So they both approached Jesus very similarly once they're found out. So how did the woman know it was her to whom Jesus referred? Again, a lot of people touching Jesus. You could see that as well. So how did she know it was her? She was healed, right. She spoke to, he said, well, he called her out, who touched me, but she knew immediately that she was healed. And she had been miraculously healed instantaneously. So the woman who had already experienced Jesus' divine power now experienced his divine knowledge. He knew who touched him. Okay? Do you think miraculous healings occur today? Yeah. You're shaking your heads. Any examples? Think of? Yeah, look at you. You've had how many back surgeries, Jill? 13 back surgeries. Lucky 13 did it, huh? So.
That's miraculous to me. I feel
Yeah, good. I remember in the prayer book, we'd have to look back in at whoever's got, but Karen Brown wrote in the prayer book, they're not here today, but that her aunt was miraculously healed. And she didn't give any details about that, but she wrote that in the prayer book. So I remember a friend of ours, this has been some number of years ago, she had a lady come and pray over, and she thought she had cancer, or the doctors told her she had cancer, and after this lady prayed over, immediately she knew she was healed. Went to the doctors, no cancer. So these miraculous healings occur. So just as in Jesus' time, though, not everybody is physically miraculously healed. Jesus didn't heal every person in Israel miraculously during his time on earth. And so we approach it with faith, have belief, and it could happen. But at the same time, what else should we be doing? We need to take practical steps as well. Just as Jill said, she feels like she was miraculously healed through 13 surgeries. It took 13, but she feels like she was miraculously healed. So Jesus can use other means and methods to work miracles, not just, supernaturally. Okay? All right, so what did Jesus tell the woman once she had approached Jesus and confessed to touching him? What did Jesus say? Yeah. And how does he address her? Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, be cured of your disease. That's verse 34 in chapter 5. Why did Jesus call out the woman publicly and not let her retreat anonymously?
She had a testimony. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Martha.
I said it's her testimony. Like Jill said, the crowd could see.
The crowd can see is her testimony.
I think that may have been part of her healing as well, because she had been an outcast for so long, and he called her daughter, and he gave her identity back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she could share testimony. She was publicly clean as such, or announced clean. So Jesus here doesn't say she has to go to the synagogue and present herself to the priest, but that was part of the law, so I'm sure that was probably some of what she did afterwards too. But Jesus was interested in her physical healing, but what else was he interested in? What's he tell her again? Her spiritual. It says, go in peace. So how can we go in peace? Only if we're spiritually healed, right? So she had a physical healing, but she also, it appears, had a spiritual healing as well.
I think he also was another lesson for his hard-hitting disciples.
Yeah, so it's another piece of evidence for his disciples of who this really is, who Jesus really is. So, and also I think, who else was it a testimony, maybe encouragement to? Jairus, yeah. Ron? Yeah, so he turns and Jairus, so this could be, we'll see, what happens before they get to his house, that Jairus could have lost faith, but here's Robert saying, he turns to Jairus and kind of says, hey, look what's going on here. And so it's also an encouragement, I think, to Jairus. Thank you, Robert.
That was what I was gonna look at last week and never got around to it. She'd been sick for 12 years. The little girl's 12 years. You know, there's a lady that's been an outcast, sick for 12 years, basically dead to society. And here's a little girl that's only been alive for 12 years and ends up dying.
Yeah.
You know, but I never, and they're both right there. I mean, the Lord always puts things there for a reason. So, two stories, both of them 12 years.
Yeah.
But you don't see much commentary about the 12-year part of it.
Yeah. A little bit later in the lesson, we're going to talk about similarities between Jairus' daughter and this woman with the issue of blood. One is they both were 12 years. So that's an interesting number. It's 12 tribes, 12 apostles. 12 is a pretty important number in the Bible. So, but there are other similarities and differences as well. Let's see, where do we go? We talked about the next. Oh, is there anything unique about Jesus' response to the woman? And if so, what is it?
He said be cured. Do you think he meant for her to realize that you are totally cured? Don't worry about this coming back.
Probably, yeah. I think that's part of it, yeah. Don't worry. You're totally cured. What else, though? How does he address this lady? Again.
As Jamie said, daughter.
Daughter. He addresses her as daughter. This is the only time recorded in the Bible that Jesus uses the word daughter to address a woman. I think that's kind of interesting. So, don't know why, but think it's interesting. But I think it also speaks to that Jesus now, this woman is a child, a daughter of the faith. She is now, she confessed, she professed, she believed in Jesus, and now she's a daughter. So now, as someone said earlier, she could be reunited with her community. As Mark says, she's no longer dead to the community. She's restored to the synagogue, and she's reconciled to God. So Jesus now has demonstrated power over danger, a raging sea, that's one D, by the way, over demons, two Ds, called legion. Over the third one here is now disease, a woman suffering from a hemorrhaging illness. So three Ds, getting to the fourth D. So read Mark 5:35 through 43. This is the grand finale, Jesus' power over the fourth D, death.
While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any more?" But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe." And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he saw a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, "Why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep." They began laughing at him, but putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and he said that something should be given her to eat.
All right, so what did Jesus and Jairus learn at the conclusion of the interlude of healing the woman with the issue of blood? What did they learn? Some messenger comes and tells them what?
His daughter died.
Jairus' daughter had died. So what do you think went through Jairus' mind upon hearing this news that his daughter had died?
Too late.
It's too late. It's too late.
If he hadn't stopped to help the woman, he might have gotten there in time.
If he hadn't stopped to help the woman, he might have gotten to Jairus' daughter in time. I think that would have been a natural human thought there. do you think, don't you think maybe he'd become somewhat distraught over this news? I think so, that he was upset that this has happened. So what does the messenger specifically tell Jairus? What else does he tell him? Why bother the teacher? Why trouble the teacher anymore? Just as Stan said, it's too late. You're too late. And I think Jairus is going to learn, and others with Jesus are going to learn, it's never too late. The message to us as well, it's never too late for Jesus. So how did Jesus respond to the news that Jairus' daughter had died? Do not be afraid, only believe. The title to our lesson, do not be afraid, only believe. Some translations have this, do not be afraid, only keep believing. So this is the most often command we see in the Bible, do not be afraid. Why do you think that's the most often used command in the Bible? Because we're afraid. Because it's so easy to forget Jesus is there with us, and we become afraid. That fear is the opposite of faith. So we're frail humans, and fear takes over in our minds. We give in to it. So why then, I think one reason then that this is the most often used command in the Bible is repetition is a key to teaching. So we're probably slow learners, so we have to hear do not be afraid a bunch of times for it to sink in and for you to recognize it. Brings to mind to me the verse 2 Timothy 1:7, for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. That's a good verse to pray, by the way, for you, your family, whoever. I'm sorry. Okay, what is it? Fear not, for I am with you. Yeah. It's a lot of ways. Yeah. I think there's an interesting, we're off on a little bit of a sidetrack here, but Jeanette, I think it's an interesting verse because it says something about do not look about you. Is that what it said? Do not anxiously look about you. What that verse says is what we often do, we start looking around instead of looking up. So we're not to be afraid, we're to look up, not around. Jill, you were saying?
I was going to say, do you think maybe we don't give Jairus enough credit? Instead of him saying, well, he took too much time with that woman, maybe he was excited because he saw that Jesus really did heal that woman, and he had faith and thought, he can do this. So it's like for my daughter, maybe.
I think Jesus, again, used the healing of the woman to encourage him, and I think Jairus kept walking with him. So he had some level of faith. He didn't say, well, she's dead. You're going to need to come now. He kept walking. So kind of like with us, we got to keep walking, right? Got to keep on keeping on. So what's going on when Jesus and Jairus arrive at Jairus' house? What's the situation? Chaos, yeah. Mark? People weeping and wailing, chaos. And in Jesus' time, there were paid mourners. And they would come and make a lot of noise, and friends would tear their clothes. They would play instruments and so forth to loudly mourn as such in their way in that time, different than our time, how we mourn for the most part today. So this is, as Mark said, there it was chaos. There was a lot of commotion, a lot of noise, a lot of stuff going on. So arriving at Jairus' house, what does Jesus say and do? Yeah, he says, Jesus asked the question, what is all this disturbance and commotion about? What's going on? Jesus tells the people the girl is not dead. She's just sleeping. Jesus is trying to bring order out of chaos. God, Jesus, always brings order out of chaos. If there is chaos, then more than likely Jesus, God, is not in it. Right? So, what's the response of the professional mourners and others when Jesus said the girl's only sleeping? They just laughed at him. These professional mourners, they see death all the time. They knew death when they see death, so they knew the girl was dead. So when Jesus says she's not dead, they just laughed at him. They knew she was dead. So what did Jesus do in raising the girl from the dead?
He touched her and talked to her.
He took her hand. He took her hand. He spoke to her. He said to her, Talitha cum, which translated means little girl, I say to you, get up. Talitha cum is Aramaic, which would have been the common language spoken at that time. So Mark uses the common language spoken at that time. So Jesus here demonstrates the power of touch. He took the little girl's hand. That power exists with us today. A pat on the back, a shake of the hand, a fist bump, a high five, whatever it might be, a hug, that power of touch is extremely great, and we should use it. So some translations translate little girl as little lamb. I like that translation as little lamb. So that indicates this little lamb is one of Jesus' flock. It's one of the lambs of Jesus, the great shepherd's flock. So I like that description, little lamb. So what did the little girl do after being raised from the dead by Jesus? She got up and walked. How long did it take her? It says immediately. It's the third immediately used in these verses. So there was no recuperation period. When Jesus healed somebody in the Bible, there's never a recuperation period. It's always immediate. The people healed always respond immediately to his healing. So how many people, back to Jill, oh, she's gone. How many people did Jesus raise that are raised from the dead that are recorded in the Bible? Three. Who were they?
Jairus' daughter, Lazarus, and the young man that was in the funeral procession.
Yeah, the son of the widow of Nain. So in what order did Jesus raise these three? Who was first? The widow's son of Nain was first, the little girl second, Lazarus is third. So possibly Jairus knew something about Jesus raising the widow's son from the dead. We don't know that, but he could have, so that might have helped him strengthen his faith. So what's the reaction of the people in the room and with Jesus? What was the reaction of the people in the room with Jesus to the little girl being raised from the dead? They were astonished. They were completely astonished. As the New American Standard Bible says, New King James says, they were overcome with great amazement. The Holman Christian Standard Bible says they were utterly astounded. It says there, this happened immediately. This is the fourth immediately. They were immediately completely astonished. So why would the disciples in the room have the reaction they had to Jesus raising Jairus' daughter from the dead? Why would they have been completely astonished? They evidently had seen Jesus raise the widow of Nain's son from the dead already. Wasn't their first experience with this. Their faith is a work in progress. Even though they'd seen Jesus raise one person from the dead, still, that's a pretty big event, isn't it? Seeing somebody raised from the dead. So they still hadn't quite got the power over that fourth day of death that Jesus has. So they were astonished. So Jesus told a man possessed by the demons named Legion to go and tell the people of the region. Why did Jesus tell the people in the room here with Jairus' daughter not to tell anyone about the raising from the dead of the little girl, Jairus' daughter. Why would he tell them not to tell anybody? It probably would have mobbed him, maybe. Yeah, could have mobbed him, possibly. So, and why would that have been an issue? It's a good point. His ministry was not complete, and I don't think his ministry was really not as a miracle worker. That was a tool of his ministry. His ministry is not complete. His ministry was really spiritual, not physical. Yeah.
To those who believe, and the others might have seen it as more like a circus performer. Do another trick for us.
Yeah.
Magician.
Yeah, a magician. So again, back to that magical, mechanical type faith that could have come about by him healing and raising people from the dead. So he could have been, as Nancy said, viewed as a circus worker, and that's not what he wanted. There's maybe another reason or two there. What else? Well, what do you think if word got out to all these Pharisees that hated Jesus? Hey, Jesus is out raising people from the dead. What do you think they would even more want to do, try to do quicker? They'd want to kill him. They want to get rid of him probably quicker because he's usurping their authority. They don't really care he's raising people from the dead. So he could have told them not to spread this around just for that reason. Also, the little girl could have been in danger. She's the one that was raised from the dead. She was the proof. She was the testimony of what happened. So her life could be in danger as well. So Jesus did not want this out maybe to endanger her. Okay, upon raising the girl from the dead and telling others not to tell others the miracle, what does Jesus tell those in the room to do? We just read it. Give her something to eat. So why did Jesus tell those in the room to give the little girl something to eat? Obvious reasons. She's hungry. Being dead makes you hungry, right? I guess. Yeah, needed the energy. So divine miracles do not preclude or exclude practical care. So both can be used, and here Jesus is using both. Okay, what time is it? Oh, 1 minute. Yikes. All right, your homework. For next week, we're going to go back to Mark's point about there's some similarities between the little girl who Jesus has just raised from the dead and the woman with the issue of blood. Between Jairus, the little girl raised Jairus' daughter, and Jairus himself, and the woman with the issue of blood. Similarities and differences. Think about this week, what are the similarities between these two occurrences, and what are the differences? Okay? And we'll pick up there next week. We don't have much left with this lesson. And then we'll move into Mark chapter 6, the first 6 verses next week. Okay? All right. Yes, ma'am. Oh, really? Had that name. Let's see, what did it told us what that means. What's it mean? It gives us the meaning of it. Talitha. Yeah, firstborn one. So Nona's saying she has a relative named Talitha. Took that as the name. Yeah. So a biblical name, and you hear that name every once in a while, but again, yeah, you probably don't think about where it came from so much, but yeah, there it is. So good. All right, well, y'all have a blessed rest of the day and a blessed week, and I look forward to seeing you next week.